ahead and get everybody's attention and get this meeting to order. It is 3 o'clock. We've got a lot of meetings going on. Healthcare is at 4. I believe our caucus chair's got a 3:30 appointment as well, so we'll see what we can get covered today. And if I could have Senator Rhett lead us in the invocation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bow our heads. Oh, Lord, we thank you for another day and opportunity to do the people's work. Guide us, lead us, hold our hands, and give us the wisdom through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. So we were going to let Senator Anavitarte go first. He's got another meeting to get to, so he's going to abandon us. But this is something from last year that the committee's already vetted out on, so you can do it from your spot and not from down here at the hostile witness stand if you want to stay where you're at.
I don't know. Sometimes it's better to be on this side of the fence.
Yeah.
At least I got a guardrail. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have seen this bill before. Basically, this bill is providing a sales tax holiday for firearms, ammunition, gun safes, and related accessories. In October, I will tell you, we need to just, the way this was drafted, there is an error. It needs a sunset, which y'all did last time. And then the other thing was, I think last year we did shorten it from 11 days. I think Senator Albers may have tweaked that a little bit. Legislative Council, I think, missed that in the version that was drafted. Senator Estevez is right on time because last year he asked me about why we need a sales tax holiday for weapons and everything. So he's right on time if he wants to chime in as usual. I'll have the exact same response, and I'm sure this committee will vote the exact same way we did last year. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm open for questions.
All right. Senator Hickman, I think you had your mic.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah, you go. Thank you, sir, for bringing the bill.
Hang on. Let the person speak.
You voted
Okay.
no last year.
Yeah,
You're good.
thank you for bringing the bill. Tell me why this is passionate to you, because you keep bringing it back. And I want to make a general statement before you answer the question. I personally, I don't see in the long run, when we keep talking about trying to do away with state income tax in Georgia, how we can talk about doing away with state income tax and still do away with sales tax. Whether it be a sales tax on a World Cup or a Falcons game or this type of thing. That's just a general statement. I don't want any opinion. So just tell me why this is passionate to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's passionate to me, as we talked about last year, just, I mean, the outdoorsmanship piece of this and the tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars that this puts into the economy here in Georgia from people all over the place. I know people may have concerns because we're talking about guns and firearms. And I think as we've debated many times on the Senate floor, if you're an unlawful weapons carrier, you shouldn't have a weapon. This doesn't, proactively promote, people to go carry weapons. I think if you're a Second Amendment supporter, you support the Second Amendment. If you like to hunt, I mean, you like to hunt. So, I mean, I think just kind of, in the bigger picture, and being stewards of, outdoors is why I care about it. And I hear from constituents all over Georgia, not just rural constituents, but people here and even in Metro Atlanta, because of the amount of money they're spending on these items, and particularly gun safes. I know people buy gun safes and they store financial documents and other things and actually never even put a weapon in them. We can ask, Bass Pro Shop, Cabela's, Home Depot, those companies, probably the number of those items they sell, and it's pretty significant over time. So, I mean, that's why I'm passionate about it. Hopefully one day we will get rid of the income tax or do something to help Georgians, and I think there's a proper way to do it. But in the meantime, I think doing something like this, and I know somebody up here will tell me that, on the low range, the fiscal note from last year, I know Chairman Huffstetter, his office is working on getting us a 2025 one. But even under the numbers of last year, I mean, on the low end, we're talking about 1.3, and on the high end, maybe 3. So not a big chunk in terms of kind of the overall investment we're seeing from the people who are purchasing these items from retailers, legally, lawfully, and properly.
And I do think the fiscal note will be very close, if not identical, from last year, and so that's why I was comfortable with going ahead, even though we're trying to get an updated one. Let me back up from this just a second, because I've already forgotten it for one meeting, and I'm going to forget it again, but I didn't talk about our staff up here, which was an error on my part. My administrative assistant for a number of years, Diego Santana here, who has been a great help. We now have in the office Devin Bell is our intern. He's got a economics degree and is working on his master's in economics at Georgia State right now, and has been a tremendous help on a lot of issues, some data that we've put out to people. Jocelyn Hill here from, I want to say Senate Research, but I know it's like Office of Policy and Legislative something now, as we've changed the name to. And then Christy Ferrati, our Ledge Counsel. So these are the people behind the scenes doing a lot of work before the meetings, and make sure y'all know who they are. So with that, let's get to the other questions. Well, that's true. But for some reason, he didn't take his honeymoon until January, the week before session. I think he needed the break before having to deal with us here or something. I don't know, but yeah, that's right. He is now a married man as well. All right, I think Senator Estevez was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator, you already asked yourself my initial question, so I'll have to switch it up for you a little bit and ask, why prioritize these products? Because you lose me when you talk about firearms, ammunition, and related accessories, which I assume include scopes and all kinds of other things. I'm all for gun safes and other products that promote responsible gun ownership. Why prioritize these items over, say, baby products and women's health products, something that impacts way more Georgians and would provide them some needed cost relief? Even school supplies, like we used to do many years ago. Why prioritize this over those other items?
I mean, I think going back to what I said before, in terms of what we're hearing from outdoorsmen all over the state, and including in my district and parts of West Georgia, I don't know, unless somebody wants to tell me or my wife wants to tell me, how baby products impacts outdoorsmanship and related to this policy position. I think those are two totally separate discussions.
I can tell you that women across the state can tell you how it impacts their pocketbooks.
Well, I agree with that.
And the fact that if we're going to have a sales tax holiday for these products, which is recreational, not necessary, and people are going to buy regardless. If we're going to use that standard, then we should be using the same standard when we're thinking about products that relate to our children, our women, our families. And then the other question I was going to ask is whether you would entertain an amendment focusing in on your passion related to outdoorsmanship. Would you entertain an amendment that specifically narrows this to purchases related to those activities?
No, I think we may have voted on that last year. Is that the same amendment? I think you had a couple of amendments last year.
I'm not going to tell you yay or nay.
Well, I know you're going to vote nay, so. But no, I'm not open to amendments other than putting a sunset on it, potentially reducing the number of days, and focusing on the topic at hand that this bill brings to the table. Great questions, though, Senator Estevez.
Senator Orrock, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the author, the argument that you laid out for providing a sales tax holiday for these activities of purchasing firearms and ammunition, you could make the same argument for fishing equipment. You could make the same argument for rappelling and mountain climbing. I mean, what is? I'll echo the senator from the 4th. it's an insubstantial argument, if you'll pardon my language, that makes this stand out, other than if you want to send some sort of attaboy to people that have very strong reactions when we do anything about gun safety down here. Even
Right.
just introducing a bill and you get threats and vicious things said about you on the internet, including home addresses and stuff. And so it escapes me as to what leaps out about this, unless you're just trying to send some coded message that we're with you guys, keep it up.
Well, I'll offer to my dear colleague from Atlanta, if it gets you to yes to vote for this bill, and we do want to add fishing items or anything like that. I mean, we can add fishing poles and fishing equipment or anything such of that sort. Paddle boards. I mean, I can give you a list of items that impacts the outdoors that I know my family and other families use across Georgia, but I'll leave that up to the committee.
Well, just to follow up, and thank you for entertaining one more question. Can you see the relevance of Senator from the 6th point that giving a sales tax, and as he was the chair of the school board here in Atlanta and knows this well, giving a sales tax exemption for school supplies, which are as a fairly universal consumer product that's purchased widely and doesn't rely on those who go in the woods or go in the gun stores and buy guns. That's a universal tax relief proposal that seems to be much more pertinent and important and family friendly than whittling out the sector that you've whittled out in this bill.
No, so I will say, as myself, as a senator from Atlanta, have served on a school board, and I think school supplies are, very important. Teachers are having to pay for school supplies, out of their own pocket that they don't get paid for. So those kind of laws, I do support, but that's not the proposed legislation in front of us today. Today we're talking about outdoorsmanship and how do we promote that sportsmanship in Georgia. So I think if somebody wants to bring that forward, we can have that debate or discussion. But I think at the end of the day, it's, kind of for it or against it. I get the, what we're talking about, but if y'all don't want to vote for it, it's fine.
All right, well, I think everybody's said what they want to say on this, and we will have a floor open for a motion first. We've got a motion from Senator Hickman to pass. We've got a second from Senator Hodges. Now, any amendments that want to be offered here?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In keeping with the spirit of the Senate Finance Committee and looking over at our wonderful legislative council, at the appropriate place in the bill, I would like to add a 5-year sunset to this bill as our first amendment, and I believe she is getting that together for us right now.
All right, and there was talk about the number of days or something too. I don't know.
She's getting that from last year as well.
All right, great. Okay. Well, we'll hold on that for just a minute then.
Mr. Chairman, just one comment Senator Hodges raises that, over those 11 days, we're talking about, about $62 million put back into the Georgia economy.
Okay. We got it.
Something, I think, fourth Monday, but it wasn't actually an 11-day period every year, depending on how it added up, so I fixed it this year.
So this actually helps that. 11 days, okay. My apologies, got some clarification, Mr. Chairman, and to Senator Anna Vitarte. Legislative Council actually cleaned it up by making it 11 days, so it would be consistent, so that part's right. So if we just add that this act will become effective July 1st of this year and sunset on the 30th of June in the year 2030, I think that should do it.
All right, so we've got a motion to amend this bill. Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
All right,
I just want to clarify, because it was said in the spirit of the Finance Committee, we want to put a sunset on this. My understanding of the types of tax credits that we put sunsets on are those which claim to create economic activity, such as the film tax credit, the data center tax credit, et cetera. And there's usually this expectation of if we do this credit, there's going to be a return of economic activity. We sometimes have seen that exceed expectation. We sometimes have seen that fall short of expectation. And I don't think that same thing applies to measures like the one before us now. So I would actually personally, even though I seconded it for discussion, I will vote against that amendment because I don't think that it necessarily falls within the framework of the typical sunset provision, or at least reasoning that we have.
so I heard earlier there was 62 million in economic activity. Is that a static number, or do you think this affects revenue by doing that? I know we generally do try to go back and follow up on these, but that's certainly the will of the committee. Right here,
Hang on one second.
he hit first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Senator Dolezal. I'm glad you used the word claim, because some of them certainly are not living up to their intended target. But I believe this is no different, that the whole purpose of putting a sunset on any tax credit is go back to reevaluate by the General Assembly to see, is this doing what we hoped it would do? And I don't think we can speak for what it might be in 4 or 5 years from now. We have actually sunsetted pretty much every single thing that's come through here, probably in the last almost 10 years now. And I think it's just a good practice no matter what the credit happens to be.
Yeah, go ahead and respond.
I would just say that we have the ability to sunset anything with a new piece of legislation. And so, again, for me, this is not a claim. The 62 million is just the high end of the fiscal note. And to Senator Orrock's point, I don't think there's any thought here this is creating $62 million of new revenue. This is just recognizing that there's a economic activity that we would like to incentivize, and that is there. That is, I think, wholly and fundamentally different from the business-oriented tax credits that we pass out to the committee. But we can obviously disagree on that. But I don't personally have a blanket policy of every single thing that we do needs to sunset.
All right, Senator Orrock, you've been waiting.
Thank you. Just a clarification about the 62 million. How would we evaluate the impact of this tax measure going forward? And I know that this committee has a strong track record of seeking to go with data. And what would
Well,
the data
we
indicate?
have these for regular reviews.
Uh-huh.
You know, we try to do a dozen a year, so you wouldn't do it next year. You'd want to have a little bit of history behind it before you did it.
But what are we looking for? Do we want to incent gun purchasing? I think it's at an all-time high. I mean, why do we incent there's not like people are staying home and not buying weapons because they have to pay sales tax on them. So what's the measure of the success of this? How
In
would
this
we
case,
measure it?
we'd be looking at, we are the finance committee. We'd be looking at what its effect has been on revenue. Has it increased economic activity? Has it been neutral? How much revenue has
Was it going to go,
cost the
like,
state
is the
law?
spend from consumers going to be at or above 62 million, or
Right.
where are we at with
Do
that
do
spend?
they respond to this or not? Is kind of
So
what
we
would be.
would be measuring the purchasing of this equipment going forward and see if
Right.
it
We
grew.
would be looking at the economic activity from it.
And whether
Correct.
it's just good policy.
All right, we've got an amendment out there that was seconded. I think we've had good discussion on it. All those in favor of this amendment, would you raise your hand?
It's a 5-year sunset.
All right, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and those opposed. We've got 2 opposed, so the amendment carries. We're back to the full bill now. All those in favor of the bill as amended, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 opposed. We've got 3 opposed, so your motion carries. And you can be excused if you need to get to your
Thank you.
other meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for the record, I do support Senate Bill 2. Phenomenal bill.
All right. Okay, so, we're actually gonna be down to one bill here. Legislative Council and others had worked on, the bill for Senator Goodman. I believe what we've done to it with the amendments, that it is constitutional. However, the author of the bill wants to look at that a little bit further and not present it today. So, he'll be looking at that on a different day than today. So he asked that it be withdrawn, and reintroduced while they continue to evaluate it. But I do think that there's been some good work by our Ledge Council to make this constitutional. We did get a fiscal note since then. The fiscal note's in there. But we'll await Chairman Goodman's bring it back to us. So now we've only got one other bill to consider today, and that is Senate Bill 2. That's by Senator Dolezal. There is a fiscal note attached to this. And floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring before you Senate Bill 2, and I'm working off the original LC 500974. This is a unique policy position. It is the only policy position I have ever seen in my lifetime that unites Ron Paul, Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris. Ron Paul, when he was originally running for president in 2012, is the first person that I know of that proposed the concept of no federal income tax on tips. And then obviously in this past year's election, both major parties' nominees were on board with this as well. So it has bipartisan support. At the federal level, we've seen bipartisan support in the bills that were introduced in both the U.S. Senate and U.S. House, and would love to see us adopt that as well here in the state of Georgia. As you know, we have AGI that flows down from the feds, so if this is adopted at the federal level, it makes it a little bit easier. But if we only have it adopted at the state level, you will find in the bill tips are defined on line 27. But essentially, we are very simply in this bill exempting tip income, which I would define as what we would traditionally think of as tips, which is cash payments, either via credit card or cash, made to service industry employees. So restaurant workers, hairdressers, cosmetologists, valets, people like that are people that we generally know derive a significant amount of their income from tips, and they're also currently taxed sometimes on tips they don't even receive. The federal government and the IRS code requires restaurants to report a minimum amount of tip income, and obviously sometimes people are stiffed by their customers and don't even necessarily receive a tip, but they are currently paying federal income tax on that tip, which is one of the things that got Ron Paul's ire, I think, originally when he began to kind of work through this concept. So there is a fiscal note. Some call it a physical note. I call it a fiscal note, tomato, tomato. And this will fall in the range of $65 to $90 million a year, depending on the year. Interestingly enough, it's kind of goes up and then down. It's not a linear increase, actually. I'm not sure exactly why that is. I know the way they calculated the fiscal note was by taking total IRS data on tips and taking Georgia's percentage of that tip income and applying that, and then multiplying that by our income tax. If we cut the income tax, obviously, which we're endeavoring to do this year, this number will be a little bit lower. And if it continues to go down to the sub 5% level that we all want to, these numbers will be down by about 10% total from what they are now.
All right. Good presentation. Question for the committee and the author. Does anybody know when tips started being taxed?
So, well, kind of.
I do. And I had a restaurant for 18 years, so I know a little bit about
That
tips.
the great Republican Bob Dole, as I understand it, was instrumental in passing some of the current law into place that the IRS has used to place some of the regs in place. But technically, I think tips have always been required to be reported as income, but you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Well,
Mr.
I
Chairman.
think that they really were not sort of mandated until 1982 as part of the TEFRA Act.
That was the Bob Dole piece that was talked about.
The TEFRA, T-E-F-R-A, which is also known as the Katie Beckett Medicaid bill, services for children. So this was part of that bill at the time. The other thing that I do want to say, and the sponsor of the bill has defined it appropriately, which is the same as the IRS in its definition, in that if you, and there's also allocated tips, which are 8%. I won't get into that, but and years ago everybody paid cash. Now it's credit card. I think it's pretty hard to not do it these days. It was all cash business back in the 90s, I think. But anyway, if you pay a tip freely in your own, that's a tip. If it's a service charge where they say we're going to add a 18% charge on your bill or whatever, that's a service charge. It's not a tip, according to the IRS. And the sponsor of the bill has correctly used the IRS definition on what a tip is in his bill. So I congratulate you for that. I wasn't sure if you'd catch that or not, but
That, for the members of the committee, that's on line 32 and 33.
yeah. Those are compulsory charges, and so they aren't considered tips. And so they are subject to taxable income under this bill. I think our Vice Chair Albers had the first question here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Dolezal, I do love this bill, and I don't normally like anything to do with changing the tax code when it benefits. And I like it for many reasons, because there's such an inconsistency in the law right now, which I think is important to note. You know, we had a new washing machine delivered last year. I gave the guys $20 for taking everything away. That was a tip. That was for hopefully they got a nice lunch out of it. They didn't get taxed on that. But at the same time, if I use my credit card down the road at one of my favorite restaurants, that person got taxed on it, which is inconsistent. Chairman Huffstower knew that from working or owning a restaurant. A lot of us probably at some point in our life did that as well. Served as, you know, waiters, waitresses, bartenders, whatever. And you know, the reality is you're not going to take a young person typically, and they're going to count all the money at the end of the day and figure out what was and was not going to be taken and taxed for. So I think we're finally leveling the playing field, because a tip is just that. It's almost like a gift of, hey, thank you. It's not their income, nor it should be. So I'm glad that you've addressed the situation, and I think it is rather ironic that we've had such great broad support on it. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and I hope that restaurants, I did read your lines 32 and 33, will consider not doing a mandatory service charge, maybe an encouraging tip percentage amount. Thank you.
They usually get better for me if they don't
That's right.
have that charge on there, anyway, I believe Senator Estevez was next. I'll get to everybody in order if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick questions, maybe quick. Senator, in your definition of a tip, you included some key words that are missing from the bill. You said service industry employees. I didn't see that in the language of the bill, and was wondering why that was not included.
Yeah, I wasn't using that as a definition. I was saying tips are typically things that we see in service industry employees. I contemplated inserting NAICS codes and things like that we could do to kind of get it into perhaps a more narrowly defined piece. And if the committee wants to consider that, that's something I thought of as well. My concern would be, to Chairman Albert's point, is that we would somehow leave out people who are receiving tips, and we would unknowingly be making them tax cheats. Should we limit this to certain industries and not others, and people think, well, taxes are not, tips are not, because technically the gentleman that is washer and dryer guys, unless they report that in their income, they're in violation of the tax code currently. Because there's that, you are required even on a $20 tip to report that as income. Now, I think we all know most people don't, so this is looking to get around that.
Yeah, I guess my concern is that there will be an incentive for people to start requesting or offering services for tips in lieu of fees, especially those who provide higher level services like lawyers and accountants and everyone else, who could potentially find an easy loophole based on this definition. I also have a question, because I also own a couple restaurants and know that there tends to be a lot of drama between every position at a restaurant. So by excluding tips from being taxed, you are really, cooks and dishwashers, folks who don't get those tips, are still taxed just like everyone else, and they are oftentimes being paid less than the server is being paid when you account for the tips. and you can include law enforcement, teachers, all kinds of folks in the service industry, service industries. Why prioritize this particular issue over tax breaks that would impact a larger number of people who are working hard on our behalf every day?
Well, I would absolutely support larger income tax cuts. In fact, I would support the elimination of the income tax altogether. But as it relates to this bill, yes, I understand that there's the front of house, back of house dynamic at restaurants. The Restaurant Industry Association may speak to that today. So they have concerns that perhaps you disincentivize some people moving up to management, or you increase the wages of management. I think that's all an interesting and valid intellectual conversation to have around this issue. As to why I chose this, I think that there's a fundamental difference between a payment of myself to you, and where I am saying thank you, to you as a server, versus to you as the restaurant owner, and here's the cost of my food, here's the cost of goods, this is going to run through your P&L, hit your bottom line. It's a fundamentally different transfer of cash or of money, as I view it. And so I do think that this is a recognition of that difference, and it's a recognition that this is not something that's going to hit a top line or a bottom line of the P&L for a business.
All right, I think Senator Beach was next. Okay, well, we've got some more questions yet, so Senator O'Rourke, you were next.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, could you clarify what's allowed to be introduced addressing fiscal matters in the Senate versus in the House?
Well,
With-
that's always an issue.
Uh-huh.
You know, the House will have a definition, we can have a different one. I would say,
We can say what the Constitution says if we want.
yeah, and,
Versus
and,
the
and
House's
I'll
definition.
also say that the last, you know, we have, House Bill 581's been an issue of a lot of interest. The last bill that was done was in 2010 by the Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers that passed out, obviously affecting revenue. So the history says, and I think the Constitution says we can do some things, but the House takes a more narrow view than we do, and you're welcome to speak to
Yeah,
that.
the Constitution says raising revenue. Those bills need to originate in the House. Bills relating to the raising of revenue. This is, in my opinion, not raising revenue.
All right,
Thank you.
Senator Hickman.
Thank you, sir. I think I may have answered my own question by just taking, but see, y'all are restaurant people. I'm not. I've never represented restaurants. Don't we have?
Correct.
Okay, so based upon that underlying rule of pay minimum wage, with this making, and a lot of these restaurants, as I recall, pay people like $2 an hour, and then they depend on the tips to make up the difference. They go above.
That's the we have a tip credit in Georgia.
Yeah, what?
We have a tip credit in Georgia that allows restaurants to pay $2 that actually aligns with federal law. It's a separate minimum wage in the case of the tip credit. It's $2.13, and that's what it is in the state of Georgia.
Okay.
But they do have to, their tips have to come up to minimum wage, or we are responsible for getting them to minimum wage.
Well, that's what I thought.
I've
so.
never had a problem with that.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So by making this non-taxable, does that still allow it to come up to minimum wage? I guess it probably does then.
Yeah, I think it's still,
That's what
income,
I
it's
think I
just,
answered my own question.
it's just not taxable
Yeah.
income,
think
which
I
you can
answered my
have.
question. Okay, thank you. Thank you,
And,
sir.
and just a point here off the subject a little bit, but I think I've told several of y'all this story. It's the reason I got out of the restaurant business. Was in 2012, I got elected to the Senate. And my wife said, you've got the restaurant, you've got your anesthesia day job, you've got the Senate, and you've got me. You get to pick 3 of those. And I didn't need a calculator to know how that was gonna go. So, but I've got a nice monthly annuity from selling the building until I'm 79 years old. So she was smarter than me, I guess, on that. Anyway, I don't see any other questions. All right, yeah, we shut that off on purpose from the
Number
lawyers,
3.
I think.
There we go. Thank you.
Go.
Senator, I'm trying to process the public policy behind this. I get it that a tip is voluntary, but I think that's traditionally part of the pay of people in the service industry. In fact, there's some interplay between the minimum wage you have to pay them and the tips, because it's anticipated that they supplement their hourly wage by that. Help me a little bit. I'm struggling why we are picking the service industry to give them an income tax break. Senator Beach has just introduced a bill that eliminates income tax for college athletes that are getting NIL money. It's almost back to the sales tax thing where we're picking winners and winners and losers in industries, and now we're doing it in professions. I mean, what's going to come next year? Hyundai is going to say, you know what, we're doing a lot of good here. Why are people working in manufacturing having to pay income taxes, and restaurant help doesn't? I don't know. Is this going to be the beginning of a snowball? Is this the way we get rid of income tax, by doing it profession by profession, or what's your thought?
I'd like to do it in one fell swoop, but we're going profession by profession. I think to some extent we're going percentage to some extent. I think we'll hear that bill probably about whenever the House gets done with it, which is clearly a constitutional requirement for that bill to start in the House. I think that I would push back a little bit on the tip credit piece, because that applies to the restaurant industry. But for my wife's hair salon that she owns, it does not apply there. So she has members of her team that are there on commission that also survive on tips. Golf course caddies, Chairman Albers, install guys, the people that you tip at the valet. I don't know that the tip credit necessarily applies across I know that it doesn't apply in the cosmetology industry. I understand the intellectual question of why are we picking this. I think that it is a recognition that this is a working class group of people that perhaps are uniquely impacted by the income tax. I do know that 71% of service workers are women, 29% are women of color, and that is in every state except it's the nationwide average, not counting Washington D.C. For some reason, they carve Washington D.C. out. So I do think that it's a recognition of if we're going to choose to help a group of people, that's one piece of it. I think that for me, the bigger piece of it is Chairman Albers called it a gift. I paid my daughter $15 the other night for cleaning the first floor of the house. She probably technically should have to claim that on her income tax at some point if it reaches a certain threshold. We're not doing that. And so I think in a very similar way, the concept of me giving you $15 for helping me out with something is different from the normal flow of capital into businesses, into most types of businesses, your business and my business, that is a recognized fee for service as opposed to a voluntary peer-to-peer payment.
Okay.
All right. Don't see any other questions. Will the sponsor, I believe, you'd like to have a motion now, wouldn't you?
That'd be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Be my pleasure to motion do pass Senate Bill 2 LC 50-0974.
We've got a motion. Is there a second to it? Got a second, Senator Steele. Any further discussion? All in favor of this, raise your hand. All right, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 unanimous vote. Motion carries. The other bill, as we mentioned, the sponsor requested we don't do it, so this meeting's adjourned. Thank you for being here.